But as Dunn realized that he ought to take their advice, the sound of an old engine approached. A truck pulled to a stop just in front of the store. Dunn looked first to the front and then to the people in the rafters. The boys began to retreat into the shadows, chanting that it was safe in the attic. Some of the older men hesitated, but before long most joined the children in the dark. The old man and 3 others remained there, dangling from the struts.
"Too late," called the old man. "He's here. Come, I can hide you with us. Maybe you can be chosen too."
He and those 3 others groped for Dunn's shoulders. Their stink sent him back. There was no way he would go up there with them. He didn't want to be covered in shit and piss and whatever else they spat out up there. And so he hurried away, panicked. The old man gave one last call, but Dunn saw him disappear into the darkness. He looked to the front door in time to see a massive shadow rise up. It blocked his only escape. Trapped, Dunn slid towards the far side, hiding behind a stack of shelves and rusty cans. He squatted, held his breath, and prayed. The door opened. The shadow stepped inside. The dim light revealed a man, though Dunn knew it was no normal man who stood there. It had to be him, the one the old man called Brother Ash. Dunn couldn't imagine having a brother like that. The man was beastly, standing at least 7 feet tall. He wore a long, dusty tweed coat and muddy work boots. His hair was black, greasy, and it covered his face and shoulders. The heavy strands appeared to flex in time with his breathing. He carried a large tin canister in his left hand. It dripped dark fluid which looked a lot like blood. Brother Ash then opened his eyes. They weren't normal eyes. They were devil eyes which shone yellow. Looking at them hurt. Their light raked over Dunn's face like dull razors. He winced while covering his face. And that is when Brother Ash spoke. His voice didn't come from the front. It came from everywhere.
"Visitor, come out. I see you right there."
On the verge of pissing himself, Dunn risked a peek. Those horrible eyes were locked onto his face. Knowing he'd been caught, Dunn stood. His shivers kept him from speaking clearly. I'm just here to talk about steak." Brother Ash spoke.
"Come here. Let me see you."
Dunn obeyed. He crept along the shelves until he reached the end. He stood only feet from the beastly man. "I didn't. Oh, God, I didn't."
"No God. Not here."
Brother Ash dropped the container to the floor. Red fluid spurted from the sides. Dunn began to sob, knowing that whoever this Brother Ash was, he wasn't going to allow him to leave, not in one piece, not alive. "Please," he begged, "please just let me go. I won't tell."
"Nowhere to go except in."
Brother Ash approached. Dunn remained there, terrified, stricken, crying. Ash reached out, taking Dunn's face into his fingers, tracing his bones, feeling his fat.
"In. That's where you go."
Brother Ash then spread his hair, revealing a featureless face. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. His skin sagged on sharp bones. After a hitch and a snap, a line of black, oily fluid dripped from Brother Ash's forehead to his pulsating chest. And as the rift grew, the sounds of breaking bone and snapping sinew became as loud as gunshots to Dunn. Black, rancid bile fell from the gash. The streams turned to dust. That dust turned to ash, and it poured out in a cascade to the floor. Brother Ash's skull began to move, to wriggle and writhe. His jaw snapped apart with a horrid crack. Fangs unfurled from black gums. First they were small, but before long the fangs grew large and wide. Fleshy jowls stretched and worked those teeth loose, spreading ash all about the store. The maw grew and grew until it was as large as Brother Ash himself, wide and dark as the abyss. They moved to claim Dunn. From the rafters, chants began. Reverent songs, hymns to a beast, to a demon, surged until the men and boys in the attic became delirious. Dunn did not flee. Where would he have gone? He stood there as the creature took him into its mouth. It was an easy thing for the monster. Brother Ash simply leaned over and allowed his mouth to take Dunn. And Dunn felt the beast's fangs work him deeper and deeper into a gullet. Putrid airs, rotten flesh, wet ash overwhelmed him as he slid down a slick throat and into a belly. And Dunn fell. He expected to burn, to be crushed and digested in the monster's guts. But that is not what happened to Pete Dunn. He continued to fall for hours. Through the darkness, through shimmering silver fogs, he fell. He fell into bronze sprites as big as the world itself. He fell until he reached the ashen dunes. Pete Dunn stood uneasily. His eyes stung. He swatted at them until they were clear. A cold air shifted about him. It didn't come from or go to anywhere. It was wind, and that is all he knew. Night had fallen, though it was unlike any night he had experienced before. The darkness surged and flowed in and out like airless breaths. Crimson stars dotted the void sky. His eyes ached whenever he looked to them. From his vantage point on the dune, he spied a lone sun on the horizon, which did nothing to relieve the night. The deserts of ash extended on forever towards that lone light. And it was forever. Dunn knew that much. He couldn't understand how, but he knew beyond all doubt that he was in a place he should not be. "Where the hell am I?" Clicks and chirps echoed from beside him. Swelling calls, alien in character, forced Dunn backwards. He clutched his chest, expecting to see Brother Ash or the devil himself come at him. Instead, from the darkest shadows, he spied glowing eyes of many colors. Those eyes bobbed and weaved in rhythmic figure eights. Dunn spied nothing to hold those eyes up. One set shone brighter than the others. They moved carefully and glanced towards the darkness. Dunn didn't want to go there. It had to be a trick. He had just been eaten by a monster called Brother Ash. Who knew what else would happen to him? Dunn backed away, shaking his head, hands up to keep those eyes back. They followed, jerking, blinking, glancing towards the dark, as if begging him to follow. But still Dunn refused. They continued after him for only a few seconds more, until a single glowing cinder fell between them and Dunn. A howl shook the entire dune. Louder than a thunderclap, it continued until Dunn fell to his knees. Covering his ears, he pressed his face to the ash dune until the howling stopped. He checked to see what had made such a terrible sound, and he found nothing. The eyes had vanished. The distant sun had become dimmer. Cinders fell, however, all around him in light, fiery snow. The sands and dusts then ebbed and buckled in the area just in front of him. From beneath the ash, Dunn saw a flame ignite. It was no ordinary flame. It burned from blackened bone as long as Dunn's truck. An arm pressed through the ash, revealing a clawed hand which gripped the ground. The fires burst and crackled as the arm pressed down. Then another arm shot up, and it was the same. Then more arms came up from the ash, scattering flames and cinders in all directions. They were the arms of a giant spider, except they were lined with the bones and charred bodies of people. Each limb was clad in a twisted, tortured corpse, and each corpse was stricken with an agonized scowl on its face. They burned with flames licking through the cracks in their bodies. Then, once all 12 limbs were free from the dune, a fleshy, burning sack of a body emerged. A long, sable neck lined with cinders followed soon after. A half-skull with glowing ember eyes reared back. It exhaled. Fire and burning air scattered from its ragged throat. And then the beast noticed Dunn. It moved lazily, as if it knew Dunn would not or could not flee. And Pete Dunn didn't bother to run. He remained there in the ash dunes. As the demon spider towered over him, scattering its cinders onto his face and shoulders, as his skin and veins began to burn, Pete Dunn cried. As the devil pressed its giant hand against his chest, burning away his skin and muscle, Pete Dunn screamed. As his flesh abandoned his bones to join the cinders, Pete Dunn wailed. And as the pain subsided, as his thoughts began to fragment, Pete Dunn wondered about his stakes, and whether he should have listened and gone to Monroe. And when his body was affixed to the devil's arm, the real suffering began. Fires ravaged his guts, his heart, and his lungs. The pain was inescapable, unyielding, like countless scalpels probing bare nerves. And Pete Dunn's face twisted into a tortured scowl, just like all the others of the spider's body. And the last thing he heard before the flames reached his ears, a devil's voice singing,
Oh, Bessie, give me my